the arguments that actually the reorientation of our economy towards increased military spending, towards an increased dependence on the military industrial complex for the growth of the economy only does damage to the rest of our economy, to public services, to jobs, to people's standard of living. So we need to make those arguments clearly within the trade union movement. And two key things I would highlight, I guess, in closing, in terms of that, in terms of mobilizing, developing our activist base and the commitment of our unions, I think the international conference that Stop the War is organising on the 20th of June will be absolutely key, linking together our unions with unions, peace movements, organisations right across the world to take that fight back against US imperialism and those that ride on its coattails. But at the same time, if we're to get that broader breadth, it can't just be activist conferences. It can't just be where the most organised and most dedicated workers are. We also need to take it into our workplaces. We need to make sure that these workplace days of action really reach out beyond that cadre of people organised at the centre into much wider layers of our trade union movement. So I would say solidarity from the General Federation of Trade Unions. We're really pleased to be here and to be working with all of the other unions, working with the Stop the War Coalition. But it's time now to take this message out into our members. We know that we are the majority. It's about building that working class solidarity to take on the imperialists and to fight for opposition to war, for peace, for solidarity. Thank you.
You're muted.
I'm muted. Sorry, I thought I'd unmuted myself. Thanks, Gawain, for that fantastic start. Got us off to a great start with some analysis and also some practical ideas. And already in the chat, there's a link where you can join the Trade Union Network and some links about the Peace Conference that you can download on the 20th of June. Gawain mentioned the Workplace Day of Actions. The next one is on February the 12th. Thursday, February the 12th. So make a note of that, and we'll be hearing about that as the meeting goes on. So thanks, Gawain. I know you got to leave us, and good luck with your next meeting. I'm going to go straight to our second speaker. We're delighted to have Clément Poulet from the French FNEC, the French Teachers Union, to talk to us about work they're doing there. Clément has been played a leading role in the campaign against militarization in French schools, something that we're very worried about. I know my union will be keeping an eye on in this country. So welcome, Clément. We look forward to hearing from you.
Dear comrades, thank you for the invitation to this meeting. I am the General Secretary of Force Ouvrière Teachers Federation, which represents staff from preschool to university. Last week, I spoke with a colleague on the phone, and she told me about a school trip organized as part of the Erasmus program. The program included a visit to the War Museum, a march of the soldiers in the mud for hours at night, photo sessions where students posed with weapons in front of tanks, and even bombing simulations. The kids came back completely traumatized. My colleague is revolted. She told me that is not the role, the purpose of school. War propaganda is rampant. The Ministry of Education is increasing its partnerships with the military and its indoctrination programs, even going so far as to publish a guide entitled Acculturating Youth to Defense. They distributed more than 300,000 coloring books, My First Military Ceremony, to young students in classrooms, financed by the military industry. Last Thursday, President Macron asked arms manufacturers, "We need to move faster, produce more. We are entering a war economy." The arms manufacturers responded, "Yes, but public funding is lacking." In this context, the 2026 budget is about to be imposed without a vote in the National Assembly, thanks to a pact with socialist deputies. This budget gives nearly 7 billion euros more to war effort, while imposing austerity on public services, social programs, and collective social protection. Comrades, in the meantime, patients are dying on stretchers in hospital due to a lack of beds and healthcare workers. The Minister of the Army has just presented the new voluntary military service. Their target for this new conscription are the 100,000 high school students who can find a place at university each year. The march to war dictates the government's entire policy. Militarization is a political operation that requires a union response. I know it's difficult. I know that the pressure is gigantic in the unions to force everyone to accept the war effort. Some say Trump is a dangerous madman. We must rearm ourselves to prevent war. We know it is a trap. We know it's Trump who is demanding this rearmament. Macron says young people want to commit. That's true. They want to commit themselves to peace, not to end up torn to pieces like hundreds of thousands of young Russians and Ukrainians. They want to commit themselves to education against inequality and injustice. We had this discussion at my Federation Congress last month. The vast majority, the hundreds of delegates, said we don't want to prepare our students for war. Mm-hmm. We want a union that fights to prevent war and the complete blocking of our demands. A union that continues fighting against the genocide. A union that provides concrete day-to-day support to staff, parents, pupils, and students to resist. A union to organize strikes, occupations, and delegations to prevent the militarization of schools. This is what we will do to put an end to military indoctrination programs in school. On January 26, the chief of the French army, General Mandon, was supposed to give a lecture at the Sorbonne University. We said, the army out of school, and we called for a rally. Finally, we learned that this lecture had been cancelled. Comrades, in this situation, the participation of unions from United States, Ivory Coast, Italy, and Great Britain, including the NEU and the UCU in the FNEC-FP-FO Congress, was very well received. I thank the NEU and Louise Reagan for her message of solidarity in which she invites the FNEC-FP-FO Congress to participate in the London meeting against war. This is what we will do. This morning, the executive committee of my union adopted the following resolution. The executive committee is fully committed to preparing for the London meeting on June 20 and invites all its unions to participate. Comrades, prior to this meeting, we will be happy to welcome you to France to organize discussion with trade unionists from all sectors. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for that, Clement. It's really interesting and a bit scary to hear what you're facing in France, but heartening to hear how the unions are responding and your preparedness to be part of the conference in June and to work with us. So well done for what you've done so far. It's a very clear-sighted response, I think, that we will be taking note of. And I know my union, I think Louise is here, but I know the NEU exec on Saturday is discussing a motion to support the peace conference. So we look forward to hearing the outcome of that. That's great. Thank you for joining us and for that contribution. I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who is the General Secretary of the TSSA, the Transport and Salaried Staff Association. Please welcome Mariam Eslamadous. Are you there, Mariam?
Yeah, hi, Alex. I'm here.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you so much. Good evening, comrades. Mariam Eslamadous, General Secretary of the Transport Salaried Staff Association, and thank you, Stop the War, for inviting me to speak this evening. I want to talk about why peace and being anti-war is a trade union issue. I'm told that when people hear the words foreign policy or war, they're often told it's something distant, something for politicians, generals, or TV commentators, something that happens overseas and abroad, nothing to do with our lives here or trade unions who have to stick to bread and butter issues. But actually, War is a trade union issue, and peace is in the direct interest of working class people. That's the core argument of Stop the War movement, and it's one we should take seriously. Stop the War says that endless military interventions don't make the world safer, they make the world more dangerous, and that ordinary people pay the price, not the politicians who vote for them. I'd go further and say that working people pay twice. So firstly, let's talk about who actually fights these wars. It's not the sons and daughters of billionaires, it's not MPs or arms company executives, it's working class men and women who sign up because decent jobs are scarce, because apprenticeships are underfunded, or because the army looks like the only stable wage on offer. The working class fight the wars. The working class come home injured, traumatized, or sometimes not at all. And when veterans struggle with housing, mental health, or insecure work, it's our public services already stretched that are expected to pick up the pieces. Secondly, when wars create refugees, it's working class communities that show solidarity. Refugees don't get housed in gated communities or luxury developments. They're placed in areas where housing is already scarce, where GP surgeries are already overstretched, where schools are already under pressure. And that's not the fault of refugees, they're the victims of war too. But without proper investment, it means scarcity hits hardest at the bottom. And when we're told to argue amongst ourselves, instead of asking why governments can always find money for bombs, but never for council housing. So let's talk about the cost of war, because war isn't just fought with guns and bullets, it's fought with prices. Since the war in Ukraine began in 2022, global grain supplies have been disrupted. Ukraine is one of the world's major grain producers. When production dropped and exports were blocked, the results were simple. Food prices went up. Bread, pasta, cereal, staples that working class families rely on all got more expensive. So that's not an accident, it's a direct consequence of war. The same is true with oil. Look at the threats and tensions facing major oil-producing countries like Iran and Venezuela. Any escalation, any military attack, any widening of conflict pushes up oil prices. And when oil prices rise up, everything rises: transport, heating, food production, manufacturing. That's inflation driven by militarism. And who does inflation hit the hardest? Workers on fixed wages, people already choosing between heating and eating. And here's the thing for trade unionists. While prices go up, we're told that there's no money for pay rises, no money for nurses, no money for teachers, no money for transport workers, no money for council workers, no money to fix hospitals or shorten waiting lists or rebuild crumbling schools. But there's always money for defence spending. This is where opportunity cost matters. Every extra billion on militarisation is a billion not spent on doctors, hospital upgrades, mental health services or public transport. More fighter jets mean fewer MRI scanners. More missiles means longer waiting lists. And then our members are sent into disputes with public sector employers whose budgets are squeezed by those very choices. We're told to be realistic, while the arms industry never has to tighten its belt. So when we argue for peaceful foreign policy, we're not being naive, we're being practical, we're standing up for our members' living standards, because ordinary people are better off with peace, better off when food prices are stable, better off when energy is affordable, better off when public money goes into public services instead of permanent war. So aggressive foreign policies don't make working people safer or richer. They make us poorer, divided, and overworked. Peace isn't just a moral position, it's a class position. And that's why being anti-war isn't a distraction from trade unionism, it's part of it. Thank you.
Wow, that was brilliant. Thank you, Mariam. A really great focus on welfare, not warfare, which is part of our work. And there was a phrase you used right at the beginning there about war is a trade union issue and peace is in the interests of working class people. I thought it was a great focus on class, the impact on our class of war in all kinds of ways. So thank you very much for that contribution. And we're going to move on to our next speaker, who's Michaela Tracy Ramos, who is a member of the Unison National Executive. Michaela.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And thank you to Stop the War for inviting me to this meeting. It is a real honor to speak amongst so many peace activists and trade unionists. So we watched over in recent weeks, particularly the sharp consequences of US gangster imperialism, which saw the US kidnap the president of Venezuela and his wife. And let's be clear, it was nothing short of a terrorist act against a sovereign state. Trump's flagrant disregard for international law and their imperialist violence and intervention against sovereign states for the interests of US capitalism and geopolitical hegemony has wide-reaching consequences across the entire world, from Venezuela to Latin America to Palestine. It says what we've already and always known, that the US can override the rule of law for their own geopolitical and economic interests without consequence. Any person that has respect for peace would condemn the US's actions. So naturally, our own government have lined up as loyalists to the US and refused to condemn Trump's actions in Venezuela. So the British government talk platitudes about the respect for international law, but by now we know how meaningless that is. From facilitating the genocide in Gaza to watching the US commit state terrorism against another country, our government are quite happy to disregard the law if it means to continue to serve US imperialism and US hegemony. For our own government, they've been massively ramping up defence spending and continuing this drive to war in Britain. And when is this happening? It's happening at a time where our members in public services are dealing with underfunding, collapsing public services, and a cost of living crisis. Working class communities in Britain are already stretched to breaking point. Yet instead of prioritising our public services and welfare or climate action, the government is choosing to funnel billions into militarisation. So for trade unionists, this drive to war in Britain is a direct threat to the living standards and security of our members. Peace is and has always been trade union business. It's hard really to believe that this government won an election with a promise and a mandate for transformative change. The Labour Party has doubled down on austerity, has doubled down on not investing in our communities and public services, and they still remain in crisis. Us trade unionists see the consequences of this every day. Understaffed hospitals, overstretched councils, and communities left without essential support. Against this backdrop, the government's decision to ramp up defence spending is not just misguided, it's a political choice that diverts resources away from people that need it the most. In the government's own words, their own strategic defence review has said that Britain is moving to a war-fighting readiness to deter from threats in the Euro-Atlantic, and Britain will have a NATO-first policy and lead. But in practice, what does a NATO-first policy actually mean for working class people in Britain? It means lining the pockets of arms companies instead of investing in our public services. It means being completely subservient to the US's criminal actions abroad and completely disregarding any pretense of a world order based on international law and cooperation. Our own government normalises war as inevitable, but it is not. We could choose a policy of diplomacy, cooperation, and peace building, choices that would genuinely enhance security at home and abroad. We could end our subservience to US imperialism. Instead, the drive to expand arms production will lead to more innocent people being killed in conflicts around the world. Starmer may call NATO the bedrock of our security, but for our communities, this approach entrenches insecurity by draining resources from the services that they rely on and perpetuates a cycle of war. Often we hear about supporters of increased defence spending in the trade union movement argue that it will stimulate economic growth and will mean better jobs for our members. But actually, the evidence tells a completely different story. Military spending has a far smaller economic multiplier than investment in social infrastructure. Building bombs and tanks does not improve productivity, raise living standards, or generate sustainable economic activity, as it does not expand the productive capacity of the economy. In contrast, investment in our communities, investment in public services strengthens our communities. So the idea that defence spending is jobs rich is a myth and something that we need to tackle within the trade union movement. If the government really wanted to create well-paid and socially useful jobs, it could invest in the services that keep society functioning, not in weapons that are designed for destruction. But the peace movement, in the trade union movement, we've made massive strides from the motion that came to the TUC last year, Wages Not Weapons, from the UCU. And I'm proud that that motion passed, and I'm proud of Unison's position in support of that motion. But we must continue to rebuild. Debates around wealth taxes and public spending can't ignore the vast sums of money being channeled into defence. Militarisation is not a side issue, but it is central to the economic choices shaping our society. So as trade unionists, our message must be clear. We must oppose the drive to war and their expansion of arms production. We must demand an alternative rooted in peace, diplomacy, and investment in the working class of Britain. Britain's working class need jobs, homes, and hope, not bombs. We must work to develop this understanding in the movement and build the movement for war. And I just wanted to shout out the Workday Day of Action for Palestine on the 12th of February. And the national demonstration as well on the 31st of January that is happening in London. And I really hope that all trade unionists will be there and stand up against the continued violence and genocide against the Palestinian people and Britain's complicity in that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michaela, for that. Two important dates there, as Michaela mentioned, the demo on the 31st of January, and we've invited, I think, Andrea Egan, your new General Secretary, to speak at that rally, so I hope she's going to be available for that. So far, we've had Gawain talking about the threat of US imperialism, Clement talking about militarization in schools and the union response there, Mariam's talked about welfare, not warfare, and the impact on the working class, and Michaela's picked out that our government is making political choices when it decides on its spending and subservience to US imperialism. So now we're going to move to our final speaker, who is the convener of Stop the War Coalition, Lindsay German.
Thanks very much, Alex, and thanks to all the previous speakers who've made so many very, very important points. I wanted to start really following on from what Clement said about the students who'd faced these kind of war games scenario, because today it was announced that there was a poll of children aged between 6 and 14 in this country as to what they thought the word of the year last year was. And the word of the year that they chose was peace. And this was because many of them reference the situation in Gaza, many of them reference the war in Ukraine. But what we're facing now is children growing up terrified of a world which is moving more and more towards conflict, towards increasing militarism, and towards increasing levels of war. And they clearly, the young children that we're talking about there, clearly show a better understanding of what is needed than the world leaders, so-called, who've been meeting in Davos today. And I think I think all the speakers in different ways have kind of referred to this. I think one of the things we need to understand is the trade union movement, whatever its weaknesses and whatever its faults, has to be at the centre of opposition to war. If we do not create an anti-war movement, if we do not create mass opposition to what our government is doing, to the increase in arms spending, to the cuts in public spending, which is destroying people's lives. And when they talk about security, real security for people, would mean doing something about climate change, doing something about housing, doing something about the health service. This is what people want rather than more wars and more conflict, which they're being fed. So I think it's incredibly important that we are discussing this and that we've got particularly the conference in June, but also an ongoing campaign very successfully at the TUC to reverse the decision to support an increase in arms spending, which took place last year. But as everybody here knows, that is only the beginning of what we need to do. There is so much more to do. And we've seen from what Trump has done over the last few weeks, we are in a new era of war and militarism. We talk about the decline in US hegemony and the fact that Trump is talking about the Western Hemisphere, and this is why he wants to seize Greenland. This is why he invaded Venezuela and seized the president there. But of course, this doesn't mean that Trump is going to ignore what is happening in Europe or ignore what is happening in China or in Russia or anywhere else. And in fact, if you look at Trump's strategic defense document, which was published at the end of last year, he expressly says not only about we demand control from the top and bottom of the Western Hemisphere, he also talks about Europe as a failing continent. He talks about it as a continent which has been ruined by immigration, by net zero, by all of these sorts of things. And he expressly says, we support the patriotic parties. In other words, he supports Le Pen in France. He supports Farage over here. So he is deliberately encouraging these far right politics in order to get his way. Now, it's very easy to listen to Trump today and think he's a complete lunatic, and he may well be a complete lunatic. But unfortunately, he is the president of the biggest military and economic power in the world. And when you look at the response to him, there's lots of liberals who say, oh, Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, isn't it great that he's standing up to Trump? Even Starmer, amazingly, managed to put on his serious face today in Parliament and say that he didn't agree with Trump. But the truth is, their way of disagreeing with Trump is to imitate him. That what every single one of these countries is going to do is increase their arms spending, is look towards more war, is to look towards sending a coalition of the willing to Ukraine in the event of a peace deal, and looking towards massive increases in arms spending at our expense. And again, previous speakers have spelled it out very clearly. But this is going to be a massive attack on working class people. And the only people who can be at the forefront of defending them are the trade union movement. And that's why we have to fight over conscription. We have to fight over NATO. We've put out a petition today, and we're having a meeting on Sunday about this, that we're saying that we want US military personnel and US removed from Britain. There are more than 10,000 of them in this country. There are 13 bases that the Americans effectively control. We should close those bases. The same is true of Ramstein in Germany, the various other bases that the United States has across Europe. And these are things which are very important for us. We should oppose NATO. NATO is not a force for peace. It is a force for war, and it is a force for intervention. And we should have nothing to do with it, let alone the demand from Trump and all the billionaires who are forming. They'd rather have a board for peace, which is made up of, you have to pay $1 billion to join the board for peace that they've set up around Gaza. We have to have opposition to that and opposition to what they're doing. What can we do? Well, I think there's been a number of things put forward, and I very much agree with all the things that have been put forward. The point that Michaela made about we have a Palestine demonstration at the end of next week, crucially important for us, and we are going to build that as much as we can, and the day of action on the 12th of February, where I think it's important we do try to get in new forces to talk about what is going on there and to talk about the fact there is not a ceasefire. But of course, it isn't now just about Palestine. It goes to the very heart of how people are going to live around the world, how they're going to live in the United States, where they face these racist and fascist ICE people attacking migrants and anybody who supports migrants all over the United States. And there's going to be a big strike and stay away in Minneapolis this Friday, which again, we should all show solidarity with, and we should all support. But we can also put things through our union branches. We have to affiliate to stop the war. We have to support the conference in June. We have our own Stop the War conference in March, which people are able to send delegates to, and I hope that everybody does. We've got to raise the stakes. We have to get on a war footing. They're on a war footing against each other, but also on a war footing against us. And if we want to be successful in forcing them back, then we have to be able to take that on again. So I hope we can have a discussion about all these things tonight and strengthen this network, but also strengthen our support across the unions and across the working class movement in this country.
Thanks very much for that, Lindsay. I think you tied everything well together there, ending in what we do. I mean, that's partly, it's meetings like this that should give us a bit of hope, that should remind us that the world's a scary place and why it's scary, but then give us hope. And I think all our speakers have sort of pointed us in the direction of hope and the things that we can do working together and building our network. So that's what we want to open up the discussion for. We're looking for brief contributions to no more than 3 minutes, please, and on practical things, not speeches adding to what the speakers have said, but what's happening in your union, regionally, locally, nationally. How is your branch, your workplace contributing to the what do we do part of this discussion? So our first speaker is John Rees from the NUJ, and then Stuart Richardson.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, and thanks for the speakers. I just want to give people some background and context to the London Peace Conference, because this is the second peace conference in Europe that we've been involved in. We were involved in organising, along with the French comrades, MPs from La France Insoumise and French trade unionists, the Paris Peace Conference last October. And that had 4,000 people at it, very, very energized and impressive delegations from across Europe, and very much based on trade union mobilization as well. We always, when we planned that, we always intended to have a second conference in London, and I was with Alex Gordon and Chris Nynham, who are on this call, and with Clement in a planning meeting for that in Paris about 10 days ago. And there were delegations there from the Belgian Workers' Party, from Podemos, from De Linke, from some of the unions in Spain. And it's quite clear that this is going to be a major international conference. There's already a preparatory conference just to mobilize for London in Berlin in May. And the Spanish comrades committed themselves to holding a third conference in Madrid after the London conference. So we are in the business of building a serious working class international opposed to war. We've already began to get, I put some of the responses from trade union organizations already in the chat. Local branches already passing the resolution that's on the Stop the War website. And I think we've got to do this on a very, very wide scale. First of all, in the trade union movement, but then we've got to use that as a base to speak to people whose children will be conscripted, whose taxes will go to pay for rearmament in those sections of the working class who aren't in the union movement, and use this as a way of pulling them into organised anti-imperialist and trade union activity. And this will be a battle in the unions. Just let me read you a headline
Finish off, John.
From the Daily Telegraph yesterday. Starmer's dithering on defence puts Britain at risk, warns union leader. And that was Sharon Graham talking about how they had to speed up the spending on armaments. Now, this is a battle which is about our lives and our livelihood, and the trade union movement has to be central to it, and we have a huge opportunity at this conference.
Thanks very much, John. Just under 3 minutes there. There's a model motion, as John said, on the website, so get that downloaded. It's probably been put in the chat. I'm going to go to it's all men who've got their hands up so far. So I'm going to prioritise any women who put their hand up to speak, but I'll take Stuart Richardson and then Alex Gordon.
Right. I'm Stuart Richardson. I'm a member of the National Education Union, and the government have offered the teachers 6.5% increase in their pay over 3 years. Now, the national statistics announced that inflation was 3.4% in December. Now, if you compound that over 3 years, that's about 10.6%. So, they're facing big cuts in living standards. And I think that we need to develop the economic argument around the question of arms expenditure. I mean, according to national statistics, in 2024, 66 billion was spent on arms, 2.3%. If you go to 5%, you're talking about 145 billion. That's more than doubling it. And there was a report in the Mail last week saying that they want 3.6%, which is 104 billion, which is 38 billion extra. So the only way you can implement these massive increases in arms expenditure is by cutting the public sector. It's just straightforward as that. And therefore, there's a tremendous pressure to cut wages. And that is the part of the rationale by offering such low pay increases to important groups of workers. So we need to take this question of opposing the militarization in arms into the economic arena of the battle around wages over the next couple of years. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much for that, Stuart. Some good figures there. If you could share them with us, that would be good. I'll go to Alex Gordon from the RMT, then Margaret from Unite, Margaret Stone.
Okay, thank you, Alex. The other Alex, how are you?
I'm good.
Hope your knee's well.
It's recovering.
So I'm just wanting to raise the issue of the AUKUS Pact, Australia, UK, US, which was the tri-power treaty to build nuclear-powered submarines, but also nuclear-armed submarines to be deployed in the Pacific, to turn the Pacific into a nuclear-armed region for the first time. Now, in December, just before Christmas, December 2025, our sister union, the Maritime Union of Australia, called a conference in South Australia, in Victoria and Melbourne, around opposition to AUKUS. Two officials from the RMT union, my union, attended that conference. One of our national officials dealing with seafarers and one of our National Executive Committee members. It was a very well-attended conference. There were Australian trade unionists there from a large number of unions from across Victoria. And there's a huge movement going on in Australia to oppose the deployment of nuclear submarines that are supposed to be built in Barrow-in-Furness and deployed into Perth and Western Australia, where the docks are already being prepared. And there's a movement on the ground that is taking direct action against the deployment of those submarines. One of the interesting things that's happening at the moment is that the United States is pulling out, or it seems to be getting cold feet and withdrawing from the AUKUS treaty itself on the basis that they want to build they want to build the submarines in the United States, not in Barrow-in-Furness, which was the promise that was held out by the Conservative government who signed the AUKUS treaty in 2020, and the Labour government currently. I mean, John Healey, our lamentable so-called Secretary of State for Defence, a former TUC press secretary, has talked about the AUKUS Pact as being, the absolute basis of his idea of reviving the economy through military expenditure. Now, this is all going south, not south in the sense of going to Australia. This whole AUKUS Pact is going down the plug hole. It's the biggest single defence treaty which the British government have got themselves into. And it's going to be the first major victim of this falling out between the Western imperial powers, Britain, the United States, and Australia. So I think that we should elevate the question. I'll wind up. We should elevate the question of the disastrous AUKUS Pact and make sure that people understand that this is no kind of secure future for workers in Barrow-in-Furness or anywhere else in this country.
That's great. Thanks, Alex. Useful reminder of the AUKUS Pact there, and also a reminder that we are a global movement. Really good to hear about the work of the unions down under. I look forward to hobbling with you on January the 31st. I'm going to be back out on the streets. I'm going to go Margaret Stone from Unite. Welcome, Margaret.
Hi. It's just to say what we've been doing in our branch. I mean, we're actually Unite Community, so we're the workers who are not in a workplace. So we actually have very little influence on Unite as a whole. But we have had speakers from Stop the War. We've affiliated to Stop the War, and we'll be sending delegates to the AGM. We feel the next step is to get the 20th of June resolution through to Sheffield Trades Council, because that is somewhere where we do have delegates, and hopefully through that it can go out to other unions in Sheffield. I mean, one other thing that we can perhaps do, we are having a push to recruit more students to Unite Community, and hopefully we can get them on board with Stop the War as well.
That's great. Thank you, Margaret, and well done for the work you're doing, and good luck with carrying it on. Really good practical examples. Well done for that. Thank you. I'm going to go north of the border to Scotland and Ronan Ogilvie.
Thanks very much, Conrad. I just wanted to give a quick update from where we're at in Unison Scotland. I sit in the Scottish Young Members Committee and also the Scottish International Committee, and I think that Unison Scotland has maybe been behind other parts of the union in terms of building a kind of peace programme. There's been a lot of support and a lot of backing for arming Ukraine, for example. But I think what I've kind of been discovering is there's quite a strength of feeling among young members in Scotland that we should be prioritising peace and building an agenda for peace. And so we're hoping to do a bit of work over the next year in that. I'm a young member by the skin of my teeth, so it's probably not a project that I can see through all the way. But I think this is something that we're going to, especially in the light of recent events and how they're unfolding, I think this is something we can get a bit of support around.
That's great. That's really positive news, positive report. Thank you, Ronan. I should have said that we'll have a bit of time at the end for our speakers if they want to come back and respond to anything they've heard or just make some concluding comments. Our next speaker is Russell Honeyman. Can you tell us which union you're in, Russell?
I'm a rep for Unison.
Okay.
I'm a support worker, and I'm very passionate about I'm a member of Stop the War, and the reason I got elected as a rep was to try to influence people in the workplace, because I found that on the street where I live in Brighton, a lot of people are anti-war. They love it. They love to be anti-war, but they are under the impression that that is not a viable path for Britain, because they are under the impression that we face existential threats. So what I found is that there's a kind of elephant in the room that people don't want to talk about, and that's our relationship with Russia. So just referring to what Roman's talked about, it's something the movement has to address, whether we're going to negotiate or whether we're going to follow Starmer into Ukraine. For me, I'm very interested and involved in all these other theaters of this war, global war, from Iran to Venezuela. I hope that if we can resolve that relationship at the UN level, that means getting our government to commit to no longer acting through NATO, but to acting through the UN. So we could simplify and rally around that, but most average people in the street, if you talk to them about that, are fully convinced that we need to strengthen our army to fight Putin. So that's the end of my comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. So indication of some hard discussions we have to have with people about that. And I might ask some, Lindsay might want to respond to some of that in terms of NATO and the UN. I mean, we've got a very clear anti-NATO position, but I'm not sure Stop the War would take much faith in the UN either, but it's a good discussion point to have. I'm going to go to Merin Beg, who I know is an NEU activist in Croydon.
Hello, yes, I'm on the National Executive for the NEU, elected out of Croydon, and I'm very pleased to be here today. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about the sorts of things I'm looking at doing in school. Very oddly, when I was educated as a young person, I was educated for peace by teachers, and this wasn't political, or at least not framed that way. But now when you want to talk about educating for peace, many teachers are very uncomfortable because they think it's political. So, yes, it is. But so is talking about war. So is the war that our children are exposed to all the time, and the militarism we've all been talking about. And if we don't ever advocate for peace, then the warmongers win. So what I'm hoping to do is get my school to convince my head to be that we celebrate International Peace Day at our school, which is the 21st of September each year. And I think that raises the profile within schools. I think also, I'm also coordinator for PHSE at my school. So I've already added peace and conflict resolution to my curriculum. So we are already teaching it. It's just being able to let teachers feel more confident to talk about it rather than feeling like it's a political issue that they can't touch. We need to be able to empower teachers to be able to say that the kind of politics we can't talk about is you can't tell children what to vote for. But no, all issues are political issues. The personal is political. So everything about them is. And we are allowed to talk about that. Thank you.
No, thank you for that. And I think we will see increased attempts to restrict what teachers can talk about or display as this increased militarization comes on. So thanks for that, Merin. And I know you'll be voting to support the peace conference at the exec on Saturday. So thanks for your work there. I'm going to go to Chris Nynham, and then we might come back and just ask our speakers if they want to make some concluding comments, unless there's anyone else who desperately wants to get in. Chris.
Thanks, Alex. Chris Nynham, I'm a Unite member and also the Vice Chair of the Stop the War Coalition. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to thanks everyone for their contributions. Obviously, we are at the most dangerous moment, probably of all of our lives, in terms of the kind of geopolitical situation. A wider war looks closer than it's been for many, many decades. And it's very, very clear that we need to respond just as the situation is changing radically. We need to ramp up and recalibrate our own response. And I just wanted to say a couple of things about that. One is that it's very interesting looking at the opinion polls on a whole number of different issues. I mean, in general, Trump is, even before all this happened, very, very unpopular in Britain. About 70% of the population basically oppose him. On many of the issues we're talking about, there's big majorities in our favour, including the issue of the petition, which Lindsay mentioned, that we're launching in the next 24 hours, which is a petition calling for all US military personnel to be expelled from Britain. 55% of the population support that demand. And I think there's a temptation to feel as if, you know, because the international situation looks so bleak, there's a temptation to feel a beleaguered minority. We are not. Our job is to reach out to those people and start to get them organised. And so I think one thing we need to do in the trade unions is we've got very good backing from most of the leaderships of the unions, with one or two exceptions. We did very well at the TUC last year, but we really need to drive the argument and the movement into the rank and file and into the branch level and regional level very dynamically. And the last thing I wanted to say is partly kind of following on from the last speaker, it's absolutely clear that we have to take a strong stop Trump's wars position. We have to call for an end to appeasement, which is essentially what we've been seeing. We have to call for US troops out of Britain and US personnel out of Britain. We don't want to fall into the kind of remilitarized Europe camp, though. And so I think it's very important that at the same time as that, we keep the welfare, not warfare slogan as a central part of what we do. In other words, we need to carve out a third position between the appeasement with Trump and we've got to turn Europe into a fortress. We don't agree with either of those positions. We want a world of peace and diplomacy and welfare before warfare.
Thank you very much for that, Chris. And just to remind everyone here, let you know if you don't know, that Chris and Ben Jamal are in court starting on February the 23rd. They're charged with offences following the peaceful demonstration we had on January the 18th last year. So part of our work is campaigning to defend the right to protest, to support Chris and Ben in that trial. And there's going to be a public meeting on February the 12th about that as well. So we're going to be busy. I'll take Tarina, and then we will go back to our speakers, and then we'll just remind you of some key dates. Sorry, Tarina.
That's good. Thanks, Alex. I'm just going to be really brief, but I really wanted to reiterate some things that have been said earlier about the peace conference. We really do need as many people as possible to pass the resolutions in their branches. And if you passed it in your branches, then give it to your friends and your colleagues and your comrades to get them to pass it in theirs. We absolutely need to get as many delegations to the conference as possible, but we also need to urgently need to raise funds to support the conference. It's incredibly expensive to hire Central Hall, Westminster. It's a really prime location, huge, very smart venue. And it is costing us a fortune, and we need as much support as we can get and funds as we can get towards that. I just wanted to reiterate that and say there is a certain sense of urgency about it as well, because we are going to have to start giving them some money very soon. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Tarina, and links to that are in the chat, so scroll back and you can find the model motion and everything to do with that. So thanks for that. Okay, we'll come back to our speakers. I'll go in the order that they were in. I think Marianne may have left, and Gawain obviously had to leave. So Clement, do you want to make any final remarks or respond to anything you've heard?
Yes, thank you. Just to thank you and to say that it's great to see the British Labour movement building a strong peace movement, and I hope to see you all in London in June.
Thanks very much. We look forward to seeing you then as well. So thank you for that, and good luck with all your work. We look forward to hearing further reports of how you're deepening that work. So thank you for joining us, and good luck. Michaela is still here. I'll check. Michaela, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, there's just a few things that I wanted to say. So firstly, I think NATO has been seriously discredited by its open subservience to Trump. So it's no surprise that yesterday there was a launch of a Labour Friends of NATO. So I think this is a sign that of our success of pushing against militarization and war. Just on the issue of Ukraine, I think we have to be very clear that there has to be a negotiated peace in Ukraine. the only people benefiting from the war are arms companies rather than the people and working class of Russia and Ukraine. And it is being used to justify obscene increases in military expenditure. So we have to double down in our position to demand an end for the war and an end to Britain's involvement in it. And just finally, I think Chris Nynam made a very good point and contribution that actually it could be very easy to go down a path of remilitarize Europe. We need a stronger Europe to counter Trump and the US. But actually, we need to, rather than tying everything down to Trump being this complete maniac that's operating by himself, we need to actually develop the understanding that this is a global system that has perpetuated war for many years. And actually, there are dangers and elements of going into that. So I just wanted to highlight that my support for that point. And I thank you very much for inviting me to this meeting.
No, thank you for being here and for your contribution. Thank you. And Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks everybody for the contributions. Just a couple of points. Just to echo Michaela about Ukraine, we think the war should end. And the truth is that even a bad peace is better than the horrific war that is going on. And NATO and many of the NATO powers, particularly Britain and France, actually want to continue the war. There is no question about this, and we have to be very, very much against it. And this isn't against the Ukrainian people. This is against the governments of Europe and of the United States who've allowed it to continue for so long. And actually, the Ukrainian people are suffering massively through conscription, through obviously injuries and deaths from bombing, and from large numbers of them being refugees. And that's in nobody's interest. Plus, it is also, particularly with Poland, it is leading to a much, much more bellicose approach from some of the Eastern European states, which in my view is very dangerous. I just wanted to say one word about Iran because it was raised in the chat, and I don't think any of us as the speakers or anybody else has sort of referred to it. And somebody said, you know, why haven't you talked about it? I suppose the answer to that is there's so much to talk about and that it's difficult to fit it all in. But also just to say the position of Stop the War is that we oppose any intervention from the United States, from Britain, Israel, or anybody else. And we think the Iranian people have the right to do what they want to do, demonstrate and oppose their own government. And that's absolutely their right. And people will have different views about that. But the key question is, it's their job to deal with their government if they're not satisfied, just as it is in Venezuela or anybody else. It is not the job of any of the imperialists from the outside to do that. So just those 2 points I think are important. And the point about the EU. The EU is not a force for peace. I mean, quite a lot of liberals in Britain think it is and think the way to deal with Trump, let's rejoin the EU. Just as the EU is militarizing. And remember, the EU started out quite soon after the Second World War as a military and defence alliance. That was the original formation of the, or talk of formation of the European Union. We don't want that. And we're opposed to any idea that somehow our government is something that we support against Trump. We regard them both as imperialist powers and we oppose them for both those reasons. So I just wanted to say those few things and just expressly thank you to Sheffield for doing the work around the Trades Council. We need to do that everywhere. And to the Scottish comrades in Unison. And I know in Scotland, I hope with the StUC and with other bodies, we can get lots of support for what we're doing. Very, very important. And the conference, our AGM is in March. That's very important for us all to get together in a bigger live in a proper room at the NEU headquarters, but also to build for the conference in June, because I think this can be a real turning point in building a European peace movement. And obviously we want a world peace movement as well. So please do everything you can that we've talked about tonight to build it and to make sure it will be a success. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that, Lindsay, and thanks to our contributors again. So just to remind you of some of the dates that came up there in discussion, next Saturday, 31st of January, is the 33rd or 34th national demonstration for Palestine. We haven't had one for a while, so we want to be back out on the streets in big numbers, showing that we haven't forgotten about Gaza if some of the news channels have. February the 12th is the Workplace Day of Action and our Defend the Right to Protest public meeting in the evening. So do try and get involved in that. February the 23rd, Chris and Ben, the beginning of their trial. We will have a protest outside the court for that. March the 14th, Stop the War AGM. Do register for that and make sure you come. It's going to be opened up to a conference as well as an AGM. So we're, an outward-looking conference event. May the 16th will be the Nakba demonstration, the annual Nakba demonstration. And then, as several people have mentioned, June the 20th. So all of that should be heading into June the 20th and a huge peace conference taking place in London. So there'll be lots of dates added to that as and when things develop, no doubt. So do make a note of them. We hope to see you next Saturday on the Palestine demonstration. But thanks for all your work and keep it up. As we said at the beginning, there's never been a greater need to build the anti-war movement in this country, and Stop the War is the ideal vehicle through which we can do that. So thank you very much. We finished in time for you to get a cup of tea and go and watch Traitors.
Thanks, Alex.
Which is not as much fun.
There's a meeting on Sunday about Greenland, which will be on our
meeting
website.
On Sunday. What time was that? I didn't see.
4 o'clock on
4 o'clock.
Sunday. Just
Okay.
if you don't have enough to do already, if you've got a spare few hours.
Okay. Good luck, everyone, with all your work. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you.